Yeah, go ahead. Tell them who you are. I mean, for
Yeah.
background reference, David and I studied physics at Imperial College London together. And then afterwards, I went into banking, and David decided to do, what was it, two masters and a PhD?
Maybe a bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I have a master's in plastic electronic materials, and I have a PhD from Cambridge in the physics of polymer semiconductors. Now, these polymers are slightly different to the ones we're talking about today, but the principles are still relevant. And also, I have consulted previously in the plastics recycling industry, both from a mechanical perspective and also from a chemical perspective as well.
So this is why I wanted to pick David's brain on PCT, kind of give us a background in terms of the technology and the moat that they might have as a business, given their patent with chemical recycling for PP. Okay, so first question is, what exactly is PP or polypropylene used in?
So polypropylene, so I think to understand what it's used in, you sort of need to look first at what's material properties. So like many plastics, because it's got very good chemical resistance, electrical insulation. It's actually a thermal resistance higher than a number of other plastics, and also really good fatigue strength, which means it can be used as a living hinge in a number of mechanisms. But at the same time, there are, I guess, a number of disadvantages to it. So it actually breaks down in the presence of light. And therefore, and this plays actually in the conversation later, you have to add additives in whenever you're manufacturing it in order to sort of stabilize the polypropylene. And because of these properties, around 30% is used in household and industrial packaging applications. But other applications include things like pipes, automotive components, carpets, very, very wide range, etc. And globally, there's around a demand for about 70 or 80 million tons of it globally, of which China is, I guess, by far the largest and consumes about a third of the world supply. And as an extension of that, Asia is the largest region, consuming around about 50% of the polypropylene globally.
Next question for you. So people at home in general, consumers, and even me myself, have always been under the impression that plastic is recyclable because we're given recycling bags by the local council. We're told to recycle our consumer packaged goods. What's going on there? I find out about PCT, and then I'm given this impression that PP itself, which I wasn't familiar with prior to learning about PCT, is not recyclable or not completely recyclable.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. So, if you think about, the bottles that you throw away and the packaging you throw away at home, that's actually, the fizzy drink bottles is usually made from PET, which is polyethylene terephthalate, or high density polyethylene, which is HDPE. And actually the recycling rates for these in the US is actually quite large. So it's actually up to 25% of this is recycled in the US. On the other hand, when you look at polypropylene, there are a few sort of major issues with this. So one of them is it actually, as we mentioned before, you have to add additives on at the start. Actually, a number of polymers do need additives, but it actually retains the contaminants, additives, and smells from a previous life. So, for example, you don't want your, I guess, deodorant bottle smelling like gasoline, for example, if it was used previously, or maybe you do, but in addition, to that, the vast majority of recycling at the moment is through mechanical methods. So what this means is, you effectively crush it up and remelt it into pellets. One of the major issues here is you don't separate the colors out. So if you're adding, slightly different bottles of slightly colors in or slightly different packaging in with different colors, and you mix them all together, you don't really separate out maybe all the greens from all the blues from all the reds. And what you end up with is actually a bit of a mix at the end, which actually looks grey or brown. And ultimately that'll be transferred onto the end packaging product. And actually companies believe consumers perceive this of lower value, and therefore they don't actually want to use this packaging in their products. And actually, because of a number of these factors, only around 3% of PP is recycled in the US at the moment. So it ends up in landfills or waste incinerators, which contributes to CO2.
3%?
3%. It's not very much.
What a waste.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you kind of led into my next question there, because I was going to ask, you know, on their website they talk about being separate color, odor, and other contaminants from plastic waste feedstock to transform it into ultra pure recycled polypropylene, or UPRP, resin with a virgin-like properties. And I can still ask this question: what's so special about this ultra pure recycled virgin-like polypropylene?
Well, I think to start with, I think that the phrase ultra pure recycled polypropylene, it's a bit of a branding exercise more than anything, but there are a few really important points about it. So, you know, their technology is actually a physical separation process rather than traditional mechanical, which I described, or chemical depolymerization as well, which is also used, which effectively you break the polymer chains right back down to their small monomers and then rebuild them again. What this actually does, it actually purifies the plastics and removes the the contaminants and smells and things that we discussed earlier on. When people say chemical depolymerization, what they actually mean is that you have a polymer chain, you break it all the way down, and it's like monomers again, right? Yeah. And then you sell that. But what this does is it technically uses chemicals, but it doesn't go through there's no chemical reaction. But I'll tell you what the main, when we look at it at a value perspective, okay, there's a few really valuable things it could be used here for. So if you want to use recycled plastics in food-based packaging again, you can't just mechanically recycle a container which was used to store petrol and then use it to store your sandwiches in. Do you know what I mean? So you actually need to reach a certain standard, and I believe that needs to be certified in the various locations you are. So that if your recycled plastics needs to meet a particular specification, and I believe PureCycle that this is one of the markets they're aiming for. So, and I believe in one of the presentations they said they're aiming for or have received the certification where they're ultra pure
consumer package
polyethylene. Exactly, they can use it in food grade packaging. So that really is one thing. And also the challenge I mentioned before, where you don't end up with this murky gray end product. You can actually, its properties are very, very similar to new polyethylene, polypropylene, which means that you can effectively mix it with virgin polypropylene and the packaging will look as new, effectively like it's using new polypropylene. So and ultimately what that translates to, and I think we'll come on to this, is a price premium compared to mechanically recycled plastics.
Yeah, well, of course. And in terms of pricing, I can understand that people would pay a premium for virgin-like PP. But how does the pricing compare at, I believe it's $2 per kilo, with 50% margin on this for PCT. So the cost basis is $1 per kilo for them to recycle this. I'm not sure if that includes logistics. I'd have to do more of a deep dive into their presentation to determine that. But at the $2 level, roughly, how does that compare to the cost of raw PP if I wanted to purchase that for consumer packaging?
Yeah, so that, again, this is a really interesting question. So I think it's $1 per pound, or roughly $2 a kilo that they're stating here. Price is one of the key questions I have around this. So, historically, if you look at the PET market that we've discussed before, which is like plastic fizzy drinks bottles and things, you can see a price premium on recycled PET compared to virgin PET, and that's because there's a lot of competition from food and beverage companies at the moment to find and access recycled plastics, ultimately to meet their sustainability targets. So many food and beverage companies and packaging companies, and also sports companies like Adidas and things, have targets whereby they're going to use 50, 100% recycled plastics in their goods by 2025, 2030. And this actually creates a lot of, competition for recycled plastics where the supply is quite low. Now, what this results in sometimes is a price premium of recycled over virgin. And again, food grade is even higher than that. So you effectively have sometimes, the price structure would be the cheapest as the base commodity virgin, then you would have recycled non-food grade, and then you have recycled food grade in terms of the prices. Okay,
so we are talking about an ultra premium product here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now but if you look historically on PET, and according to the S&P Global, in the last year, you can see price premiums 10, 20% of recycled PET over virgin PET. From sort of looking at the literature from PureCycle, they're assuming price premium is actually substantially higher than this, and so the question is as they ramp up production, the first consumers they're going to have are willing to pay very premium prices, because they're very obviously very keen to get the supply. But as this expands more wide, the supply increases, you get more competitors on the market. The question is, will they be able to maintain this price premium over virgin?
So I guess that leads me to another question I have, which is, I'm going to try and break this into two questions just to make it a bit simplify the answers here. But one of them is going to be, how defensible is, I know you're not a patent attorney, but how is their patented process going to be against competitors, given that there are mechanical and chemical ways to recycle plastics? I don't know if you've seen any competitors or you're aware of any competitors that can recycle to virgin grade PP the way that PCT can.
So I guess it's an interesting question. So if you look at the plastics recycling space generally across all polymers or all plastics, there's actually a huge number of small and mid-sized companies looking at this, and they often partner with very large food and beverage companies to actually help them do their R&D and finance and stuff like that. Now, for PP specifically, like you can currently recycle PP. It's not great, but you can recycle. You can't use it for food grade packaging, but you can do it. There's not very much done, as we said. There's 3% done in the US. But actually, PureCycle Technologies is really the first one I've seen which really can reach this virgin grade or claimed virgin grade plastics for polypropylene. Now, but if you look at the patent, so I'm not a patent attorney, but you have to realize that it's a very specific process, and there are many potential processes to do this. So it is a solvent separation, a solvent-based separation. So there is obviously a risk there of maybe some of these players working in adjacent polymers to realize that the polypropylene market is actually potentially a very attractive market for them to move into and try and implement their technologies in. So I would say that is potentially a risk. However, that being said, PureCycle Technologies is clearly a first mover in this space.
Yeah, they're going to have first mover advantages. The question is, how defensible is this moat with just the patents? Personally,
exactly.
I wouldn't rely on the patents. I'd look to gain as much market share as possible. And you've obviously got to look at the huge capex that's required to build these manufacturing plants in the first place. And then you've got to find the locations and so on. So I'm just going to go back here to something you mentioned, because you said it earlier and I kind of missed the point, but you said only 3% of PP is recycled. And I'm wondering why that's the case.
Well, so we mentioned it earlier. So we said that, that there are major issues with it. So like, it contains contaminants, additives, smell from a previous life. And yeah, and so like
it really comes down to the inability to convert it to basically essentially virgin grade, which is what the demand is for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the reasons is the issues that we discussed previously. So the issues it has with contaminants, additives, and smells. But another reason is the type of end uses it's used in. So it's not like your plastic bottles where you can easily throw it in the recycling bin. It might be used, for example, in pipes. It might be used in those chemical tubs or containers, which is used because it's got very high chemical resistance. And these are not really areas where the people using that would be more industrial applications. It's not really areas that people really are thinking or motivated to actually recycle.
What issues do you foresee in general from a kind of scientific process, and also from a business perspective, because you're in a very unique perspective on this in that you are a scientist, but you do operate in the business realm, advising and consulting on stuff like this. So
Yeah, so in terms of the process itself, I don't really see any specific. I think scaling it up is potentially going to be it's going to be an issue because I think when the patent was done, it was obviously very small lab based preparations they were doing, but actually scaling this up and they not just one plant but multiple plants is going to be an issue.
Mm.
Um, but actually with plastics recycling in general, one of the major challenges is actually just getting enough supply, good quality supply of it. If you know what I mean, actually just getting pure, because if you think about it, they only recycle polypropylene. They don't care about anything else. So they have to actually secure a pure supply of polypropylene and potentially put that through some pre-treatment before they actually put it through the process. So actually securing the supply it is actually sometimes very challenging in these areas because you ultimately need a critical mass of polypropylene gathered in one place to be able to supply it. So it actually rely quite heavily on the upstream supply chains to be able to feed you. Now that being said, they are trying to mitigate this. They're building contracts and networks, and my understanding is that they have the supply secured for the first plant for 3 years, and with the potentially roll that over. But the question is, can they do this, as they expand more broadly within the US and Europe? And actually, as we said before, Asia has the largest market demand of this. And is this something to be able to, if they want to expand into Asia as well, which is the largest market potentially, is this something to be able to secure there?
Yeah.
So like, as I said previously, a lot of this at the moment is being driven by the company's own sustainability targets rather than external pressures.
Mm.
So, for example, like large FMCG companies, clothing companies, as I said, have set their own ambitions, which I believe, from what I understand, are ahead of what the government's actually mandating.
Yeah.
They actually have specific, to be able to ramp up their supply networks of recycled plastic by 2025, 2030. So, like, this is a key driver in the area. It's more on the demand side rather than and again, ahead of government legislation rather than on the supply side.
What other questions did I have for you? I think we've kind of covered them all. We discussed the kind of cash, so ignoring the environmental impact. The $2 per kilo, so the premium to recycled. I think that's everything, Dave. Do you have anything that you think would be worthwhile mentioning for viewers that are considering this as a long-term investment?
Yeah, so I think there was there was a question on technology in early stages of development. So like the thing is, right, is that this is a very specific, it's polypropylene, right? Mm-hmm. So if anything disrupts the polypropylene supply chain or demand, it's obviously going to impact PCT. Okay?
Yeah.
So, like some other companies may be looking at multiple types of plastic, etc. That's probably very unlikely. But, in many ways, recycling is almost the last resort. If you think about your reduce, reuse, recycle, recycling's the last part of that. So, like ultimately long term, the demand is going to be or the trend is going to be to reduce the use of plastics rather than use them and recycle them. And therefore, the say 20-year time horizon, that may play a factor.
Very, very interesting point. I hadn't actually thought of that. I mean, do you think does that have legs? Are we going to be able to reduce the demand or for plastics over a 20 or 50-year period? Are there any new materials that are in the early stages of development that could overthrow plastic, or not just plastic but PP in particular?
Yeah. So the reason plastic's used so widely is because it is such a good material for many applications. So it is going to be very, very difficult to disrupt that. But like that being said, with new innovations, that's there are potentially ways that companies could use less plastic. So, for example, improving the plastic so that you use less of them in a packaging material. So, for example, if you're able to make packaging 50% lighter by improving its strength properties, that's one way of actually reducing the amount of plastics used. So it might not be simply reducing the amount of plastic sold per bottle or whatever, but it might be, well, actually it would be per bottle the amount of plastic which was which was sold, which would be reduced, but the amount of bottles might stay the same, for example.
I guess the other side of that argument would be that if you can find a way to efficiently recycle PP, then you're going to reduce the pressure on the other end of this chain, which is reduce and reuse, because people know that there is a way to turn this around in an environmentally friendly way. So that's kind of a leading question, but I assume this is an environmentally friendly process. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. I imagine it is. I actually don't know.
You'd hope so. You'd hope we're not just trying to save the environment in one way by destroying it in another way. But
because like you understand that you would need to understand the specifics of the chemicals that are used and the energy that's used and things like that. At this stage, it's probably quite confidential information.
Oh, I'm sure. So I kind of think like based on I'm going to give a very like generalist response to this, but I'd say this is, if you're looking at investments that could change the world, it's certainly a very interesting one, but at this point, it's definitely highly speculative as an investment. And it's kind of a boom or bust investment, isn't it? I wouldn't necessarily say bust. They've got one plant which is almost complete. They've got PP to supply for the next 3 years, so it's a bit of an asymmetric play. I definitely wouldn't go all in on PCT as an investment, but I'd certainly allocate like a small fraction, like 1% of my portfolio, for the chance of 20 or 30x returns over the next 5 years. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything you'd like to add, David?
No, I think that was a good conversation. I think we covered most of it.
We did. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, David.